A woman I had never met in my life leaned down at my brother's graduation, pressed an envelope into my palm, and whispered 11 words that split my whole life into a before and an after. Don't react. Your father doesn't know either. I didn't know it yet, but that sentence was the first crack in a dam that had been holding back over 2 decades of lies. Let me back up. Welcome back. Pour your coffee, settle in, and get ready. Because in these stories, karma always finds the address. Subscribe so you never miss what happens next. My name is Raf William. I'm 35 years old. I run a small contracting business out of a garage that smells like sawdust and burnt coffee. And up until that Saturday afternoon, I was the family disappointment. Not disappointment like I'd committed a crime. Disappointment like a stain on the carpet. Nobody wants to talk about at dinner, but everybody stares at anyway. My brother Ethan is 27. Golden boy. Full ride to Harvard for his IMBA. And that day, in an auditorium packed with proud families fanning themselves with programs, my father, Duncan William, stood up in the 3rd row before Ethan had even crossed the stage and announced, out loud, to anyone within 20 feet, that Ethan would inherit everything. The company. The house. The cars. All $75 million of it. People clapped. My mother Martha dabbed her eyes with a tissue like she was watching a Hallmark movie instead of watching her other son get erased in real time. I sat in the back row in a blazer that didn't fit right, clapping along because what else do you do? You clap. You smile. You've been doing it your whole life. Your brother, my father had told me more times than I could count, growing up, got the brains. You got the muscle. He always said it like it was a compliment, like being the strong one was supposed to make up for being told, year after year, report card after report card, that I simply didn't have what it took. I believed him. That's the part that still makes my jaw tighten. I believed every word. So when Ethan's name was called, and the whole auditorium rose to its feet, I stood too, clapping, telling myself this was fine, this was normal, this was just how families work, until a woman in a gray coat, maybe 60 years old, silver hair pulled back tight, walked straight down my row like she'd been sent there. She didn't look at the stage, she looked at me. Raf William? She said, quiet enough that only I could hear it under the applause. Yeah, I said. Because what was I supposed to say, no? She put the envelope in my hand, closed my fingers around it herself, like she didn't trust me not to drop it. And that's when she said it. Don't react. Your father doesn't know either. Then she turned and walked out a side door before I could ask a single question. I sat back down. My heart was doing something it had never done before. Not fast exactly. Just loud. Like it wanted me to notice it. I didn't open the envelope in that auditorium. I want to be honest about that. Because if this were a movie, I'd have ripped it open right there and gasped dramatically while triumphant music played. That's not what happened. What happened is I sat through another 40 minutes of speeches with a sealed envelope in my jacket pocket, feeling it like it was made of lead, while my father hugged my brother on stage and told a reporter from the local paper that Ethan was the future of William Manufacturing. I clapped for that too. My wife Odette noticed something was wrong before we even made it to the parking lot. You've gone quiet, she said, threading her arm through mine. Odette notices everything. It's the most annoying and most wonderful thing about her. I'm fine, I said. You're doing the thing with your jaw. What thing? The thing where you clench it like you're trying to crack a walnut with your face. I almost laughed. Almost, just tired. She didn't push. That's Odette's gift. She knows when to wait. But she also slid her hand into my jacket pocket while we walked, the way she does when she wants to hold my hand through fabric. And she felt the envelope. What's this? I don't know yet. She looked up at me, and I saw the exact moment she understood this wasn't nothing. Then let's go find out. We didn't go home. We drove to a diner 2 towns over. The kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a bell over the door that hasn't worked right in years. Because I needed somewhere that wasn't ours. Wasn't full of family photos and report cards from 3rd grade that my mother still had magneted to the fridge like evidence in a trial against me. I ordered coffee I didn't drink. Odette ordered nothing. She just watched my hands shake as I broke the seal. Inside was a single typed letter and a folded photocopy of something that looked official, a document with a letterhead I didn't recognize. William Manufacturing's logo stamped faint in the corner like a watermark. The letter read, Raf, I have worked for your family for 11 years, in a role you don't know exists. I am done being quiet. Every academic record used to justify how your parents raised you was altered. Every performance evaluation from your early jobs was rewritten before it reached your father's desk. You were never the dumb one. You were the inconvenient one. There is a difference, and someone has profited from you never learning it. I will find you again. Trust no one at that party who was smiling in the front row. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower because my brain kept sliding off the words like they were ice. Raf, Odette's voice cut through. Breathe, I am breathing. You're doing the thing where you forget to. I set the letter down on the sticky table between the sugar packets and the ketchup bottle, and I looked at my wife, and I said the only thing that made sense in that moment. What if none of it was true? None of what? Any of it. The grades, the reports, everything they used to tell me I wasn't good enough. Odette didn't answer right away. She picked up the letter, read it herself, and her face did something I'd never seen it do before. It went still. Not calm. Still, like a lake right before a storm. Whose are? She finally asked. I don't know. And who was smiling in the front row? That's the question that kept me up that night. Because I'd been staring at that row for 2 hours during the ceremony, and I knew exactly who'd been sitting there. My father Duncan, my mother, Martha, and beside them, close enough to lean over and whisper jokes in my father's ear every 10 minutes, laughing louder than anyone else in the building, my Uncle Gene. I need to explain something about Gene. Because if you're picturing some mustache-twirling villain, you're wrong. That's what made it so easy for him. Gene isn't blood. He's my father's oldest friend from college. And somewhere along the way he became Uncle Gene the way close family friends do. And somewhere further along the way he became general counsel for William Manufacturing. And further still, chairman of the board. He was at every birthday, every holiday. He taught me to fish when I was 9 because my father was always too busy with the company. He remembered my birthday when my own parents sometimes needed a calendar reminder. Gene was, as far as I knew, the one adult outside my parents who had never once made me feel small, which in hindsight was the most calculated kindness I have ever received in my life. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Odette staring at the ceiling doing math I didn't want to do. Every independent evaluation that had ever come back from my part-time jobs as a teenager. Who reviewed those before my father saw them? Gene, as family counsel, handled administrative matters. Every school conference where my grades came up short compared to Ethan's. Who had access to the school's records office because he sat on the local education board? Gene. Every single humiliating data point of my childhood ran through one man's hands before it reached my father's eyes. You're not saying anything, Odette whispered in the dark. I'm trying to figure out how long. How long what? How long he's been doing this. She rolled to face me. Doing what exactly? We don't even know what this is yet. She was right, technically, but I already felt it in my chest the way you feel weather changing in an old injury. Something had been done to me, deliberately, for a long time, and the man who taught me to bait a hook had probably known about it the whole time he was doing it. I need to find her, I said. The woman from the graduation. You don't even know her name. The letters signed R. Odette sat up, pulling the sheet with her. Raf, think about this. If someone inside your father's company has been altering records for over a decade, and they just handed evidence to you at a public event instead of, I don't know, a lawyer's office, that's either someone incredibly brave, or someone playing a game you don't understand the rules of yet. Maybe it's both. Maybe, she agreed. So we go slow. We don't confront Gene. We don't confront your dad. Not yet. I hated how right she was. I hated it because every instinct in me wanted to drive to my parents' house that night, wake my father up, and shove that letter in his face. But if the last 30 years had taught me anything, it was this. My father believed what he was shown. He didn't investigate. He trusted. That's not a flaw, exactly, until someone decides to exploit it. Fine, I said. Slow. Slow lasted 4 days. On the fourth day, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, and a voice I did. "It's Rose," she said, no greeting, like we'd already known each other for years. "You got the envelope. You're R. I'm Rose. I don't have time for pleasantries, Raf, so listen carefully. I worked in the records division at William Manufacturing for 11 years. I resigned last month. Officially, it says I retired. Unofficially, I quit because I couldn't keep doing what Gene asked of me." My hand tightened on the phone. "What did he ask of you?" "To keep a ledger he didn't want in the official system. A second set of numbers. You know what a second set of books usually means." I did know. Everyone who's ever watched a crime documentary knows. He's stealing from the company. "He's been stealing from the company for 19 years, Rose said. Slow enough that auditors never flagged it. Fast enough that it added up to millions. And your father never noticed because your father trusts Gene with everything. The finances, the HR files, even the personal records on his own sons. Why me? Why give this to me and not, I don't know, the police? A lawyer? Someone actually qualified to do something with it?" There was a pause on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Because you're the only person in that family Gene has spent 30 years underestimating," Rose said finally. "And underestimated people are the only ones who can walk right up to a man like that, without him seeing it coming." I sat with that for a second. Odette, beside me at the kitchen table, mouthed what, and I held up a finger. "Why should I trust you?" I asked Rose. "You could be lying. You could be part of whatever this is." "You shouldn't trust me," Rose said, and something in her voice actually sounded relieved that I'd asked. "You should trust documents. I have copies of altered school records with the original scores still faintly visible under the whiteout patterns from 20 years ago, before people did this digitally. I have financial statements showing withdrawals that don't match anything in the official ledger. I have performance reviews with 2 different signature dates on the same page. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look. And if I look, and it's all real, then you have a decision to make about what kind of son you want to be to a father who was lied to just as badly as you were." That last sentence stuck a knife straight through the anger I'd been building for 4 days, because it hadn't occurred to me, not once, that my father might be a victim in this too. I'd spent 4 days building a case against Gene in my head, and somewhere in there I'd quietly filed my father under guilty by association. The man who'd stood up at a graduation and handed away $75 million without blinking, without once wondering if the reasons he'd been given for that decision were true. "Send me everything," I said. "Tonight. It's already in your inbox." Rose said, "Check the folder called Invoices." Nobody looks twice at a folder called Invoices. Odette and I sat at that same kitchen table until 3 in the morning, going page by page through a folder that should have been titled something closer to Evidence of a Life I Never Actually Lived. There was my 6th grade standardized test, official copy 42nd percentile, faint under the correction fluid, visible when Odette held the scan up to the light on her phone screen and adjusted the brightness, 91st percentile. There was a performance review from the summer job I'd had at 17, working at a hardware store owned by a family friend. Official copy, shows limited initiative, requires significant supervision. The original, buried in a metadata trail Rose had somehow extracted, one of the most capable young employees we've had, recommend for management track. I remember Odette put her hand over her mouth when we found that one. Not because it was shocking exactly, but because it was so specific. Someone had taken the words "one of the most capable" and turned them into "requires significant supervision," and had done it carefully enough that nobody ever thought to check. 19 years, I said out loud, mostly to myself. 19 years of him doing this. 23, actually, Odette said quietly, scrolling further down. "Raf, look at this one." It was dated the year I was 12. A letter, on William Manufacturing letterhead, addressed to my father, discussing concerns raised by the school regarding Raf's aptitude and recommending my father manage expectations accordingly, focus family resources on Ethan's demonstrated potential. Signed Gene, 12 years old. I was 12 years old when a man I called uncle decided, on paper and writing, that my life's ceiling had already been reached. He built the whole story, I said. Before I even knew there was a story being built. Odette reached over and took my hand, the same hand that had been shaking at the diner 4 days earlier, And this time it wasn't shaking. It was steady. Cold. Almost. "So what do we do with this?" she asked. I looked at the folder. At 19, no, 23, years of manufactured failure sitting on a laptop screen in my kitchen at 3 in the morning. "We don't burn it down loud," I said. "We burn it down smart. Gene's been playing a long game. I want to play a longer one." "And your dad?" That was the part I still didn't have an answer for, because somewhere between Gene forging a report card and my father standing on a stage giving away everything I should have had an equal claim to, there was a version of my father who believed every lie he was handed, because the man handing them to him had earned that trust with 30 years of birthday cards and fishing trips. I didn't know yet if that made him innocent. I only knew he wasn't going to stay ignorant much longer. The next morning I called the one person outside my immediate family who'd worked at William Manufacturing longer than Gene had, a man named Manny, who'd run the loading dock and later the logistics department for almost 30 years, and who'd taught me more about actual hard work during summer shifts than my father ever managed to teach me about anything. Manny was 71 now, retired, spent his days fixing up an old boat he swore he'd have in the water any month now. He answered on the second ring. "Ralph William," he said, like my name was a small surprise and a small pleasure at once. "To what do I owe this? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest, even if it's ugly." There was a pause, the kind older men give you when they already suspect where a conversation is headed. "Ask, did you ever notice anything strange with Gene? Back when you worked there? Anything with the books? Or with how information got passed to my dad?" Manny didn't answer right away. I heard him breathing, heard a gull cry somewhere behind him. He must have been out at the marina. "I always wondered why a company that size never brought in outside auditors for the personnel files," Manny said slowly. "Financial audits, sure, every year, like clockwork. But nobody outside Gene's office ever touched personnel records. HR files. School reports parents submitted for scholarship matching. All of it ran through one desk." "Whose desk?" "Gene's," Manny said. "Your father trusted him with everything administrative so he could focus on the vision, as your dad liked to call it. I always thought it was strange. Your dad never asked for a second opinion on anything. Man ran a $75 million operation and let one guy be the only set of eyes on half of it." My chest tightened. "Did you ever say anything?" "Once," Manny admitted. "Years back. Told your father it might be smart to have someone double-check the personnel files, given how much weight he put on them for things like scholarship contributions and bonus structures. Your father laughed it off. Said Gene was like a brother to him, more trustworthy than most blood relatives. Told me I was overthinking a loading dock manager's job. And you dropped it." "I dropped it," Manny said, and I heard real regret in it, thick and slow like syrup. "Wasn't my place, I figured. Wish I hadn't figured that. It's not your fault, Manny. Didn't ask if it was my fault. Asked myself if I could have said something sooner, and I know I could have. That's different from fault. That's just true." He cleared his throat. "Why are you asking about this now, after all these years?" I told him. Not everything. I didn't have everything yet, but enough. The envelope, Rose, the folder, the letter about a 12-year-old boy's demonstrated ceiling. When I finished, Manny was quiet for a long moment. "You know your dad's not going to want to hear this," he finally said. "I know. He's going to want to believe there's an explanation. Man's built his whole identity around trusting Gene. That kind of trust doesn't crack quiet. It cracks loud, and it cracks messy, and it takes the person holding it down with it. I don't have a choice anymore, Manny. Gene doesn't know I know. That's the only advantage I've got." "Then don't waste it," Manny said, sharper now, sounding for a second like the man who used to run a loading dock with a voice that could carry over forklift engines. "You go at a man like Gene with anger, you'll lose. He's had 30 years of practice looking calm while he takes what isn't his. You go at him with proof, laid out clean, no room for him to talk his way sideways. That's the only way this ends the way it should." How should it end? Manny didn't hesitate. With him standing in a room full of people who trusted him, watching every single one of them stop. Over the next 2 weeks, Odette, Rose, and I built something we started calling, half joking, half not, the file. It wasn't a file anymore, not really. It was a case. Rose had contacts, old colleagues from the records division, who'd left the company under circumstances that suddenly made a lot more sense once you understood what they might have witnessed. Two of them agreed to talk, off the record at first, then on it, once they realized they wouldn't be alone. One was a woman from the Scholarship Administration Office, who'd been quietly let go 4 years earlier after asking too many questions about a special review process Gene insisted on for any records involving the William family directly. He told me it was for privacy, she told Rose, in a recorded call I listened to twice. Family matters, he called it. Sensitive, I should have pushed harder. I needed the job. The other was an accountant, younger, who'd left the company entirely, moved states away, and only agreed to talk once Rose promised his name would be protected until absolutely necessary. He confirmed what Rose already suspected, a secondary account, funded through inflated vendor invoices, controlled entirely by Gene, that had been quietly skimming from William Manufacturing for nearly 2 decades. Not enormous amounts at any one time. Small enough to disappear into the noise of a company that size. Consistent enough that it added up to millions. 19 years of small cuts, Odette said one night, staring at the numbers spread across our kitchen table like a crime board in a detective show. That's not desperation. That's patience. That's exactly what worries me, I said. Because the more we dug, the clearer the shape of it became. Gene hadn't just been stealing money. He'd been managing perception, carefully, deliberately, for decades. If Ethan was positioned as the brilliant, obedient heir, and I was positioned as the incapable afterthought, then Gene's real target was never really me at all. I was collateral. The actual target was control. A grateful, golden boy heir who trusted Uncle Gene completely, who'd run the company exactly the way Gene advised him to for the rest of his career, was worth infinitely more than an unpredictable second son who might, God forbid, ask questions. I wasn't just lied to. I was neutralized, kept small, kept doubting myself, kept out of any position where I might one day sit on that board and start asking why the personnel files never got outside review. It should have made me want to burn the whole company down. Instead, strangely, it made me calmer than I'd been in weeks. He built a story where I was never a threat, I told Odette one night, lying awake again. Though this time, the stillness in my chest felt different. Sharper, purposeful. So I'm going to let him keep believing that until the exact moment it stops being true. And your dad? She asked again, because she always asked again, because she knew it was the one thread I kept avoiding. My dad gets the truth, I said. All of it, before anyone else does. He deserves to hear it from his son, not read about it in a headline. Even after everything? Especially after everything, I said, because if I do this the way Gene did things to me, quiet, cruel, behind his back, then I'm not any better than the man I'm trying to take down. I chose a Sunday, because my father always took his coffee slow on Sundays, sitting on the back porch of the house I grew up in, reading a paper he insisted on getting in print even though the news was a full day old by the time it arrived. I drove over alone. Odette offered to come, and part of me wanted her there, but this needed to be just us, the way most of my childhood conversations with my father had never actually been. He looked up when I came around the side of the house, surprised, pleased in that careful way he always was with me, like affection was something he'd been told to ration. "Raph," he said, "didn't expect you. Everything all right?" "No," I said, "it's not." Something in my voice must have carried more weight than I intended, because he set the paper down slowly, folded it in his lap, and gave me his full attention, a rare enough thing that I almost lost my nerve. "Sit," he said. I sat. I put the folder on the small table between us, the same folder Rose had built, the same folder Odette and I had spent 2 weeks turning into an airtight case, and I said the only opening line that felt honest enough. "Dad, I need you to look at something, and I need you to not defend Gene until you've read all of it." His face changed the second I said Gene's name. Not anger, something closer to bracing, like a man who's heard a car backfire and instinctively ducks before he even registers the sound. "What is this?" he said. Not a question, a demand dressed up as one. "Read it," I said. "Please," he read. I watched my father's face do something over the next 40 minutes that I will never forget as long as I live. I watched 30 years of certainty collapse in real time, page by page, document by document. I watched him find the letter about a 12-year-old boy's demonstrated ceiling and go completely still. The way Odette had gone still in that diner, the way you go still right before something in you breaks. "This is my handwriting," he said quietly, holding up a memo with his own signature at the bottom. A memo I'd never seen before that Rose had somehow pulled from an old file, his approval, based entirely on Jean's summary, of reallocating family scholarship funds toward Ethan's academic trajectory, given Raf's assessed aptitude limitations. "You signed what Jean told you was true," I said, "not what was actually true." "I signed this." He held the paper like it might combust. "I signed away, Raf. I need you to understand. I know, Dad. I trusted him," he said, and his voice cracked on the word trusted in a way I had genuinely never heard from him, not once in 35 years. "I trusted him with the company. With you boys. He stopped. His hands were shaking. "He was good at being trusted," I said quietly. "That was the whole plan." My father sat there for a long time, staring at 1923, years of paperwork spread across a porch table on a quiet Sunday morning. And when he finally looked up at me, there were tears in his eyes that I had also never seen before. "I told you your whole life that you weren't as capable as your brother," he said. "I said it to your face. I said it in front of people. I said it at his graduation, in front of everyone. I gave away." His voice broke entirely. "You believed a lie," I said. "That's different from telling one, is it?" he asked, and for the first time in my life, my father looked at me like he genuinely didn't know the answer, like the ground under 35 years of certainty had opened up beneath him and he was still falling. "It has to be," I said. "Because the alternative is that you're the villain in this, and Dad, you're not. You're the mark. Same as me. Gene's been playing both of us for decades. The only difference is I found out first." He reached over, and for the first time since I was a small boy, my father took my hand and held onto it like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Not what do you want. What do you need?" Like he already understood this wasn't a conversation about feelings anymore. It was a conversation about a plan. "I need you to trust me," I said, "the way you trusted him. Except this time, trust me, because I've actually earned it." "You've always deserved that," my father said. "I just never let myself see it." "Then let's fix that," I said, starting with Jean. We didn't move fast, and we didn't move loud, and honestly, that was the hardest part. Sitting on the truth for 6 more weeks, while Jean kept walking into board meetings with his easy smile, kept calling my father old friend, kept, at one family dinner, putting his hand on my shoulder and telling me it was never too late to find your footing in life, Raf. Some men just bloom slower. I smiled at him that night. I actually smiled, and thanked him for his kindness, and went home afterward and threw up in the bathroom because my body understood something my face hadn't let show, that I had just let a man who'd spent 23 years dismantling my life pat me on the back like I owed him gratitude for it. My father, to his credit, matched my patience once he understood the stakes. He brought in an outside law firm quietly, one with no connection to William Manufacturing's usual counsel, and had them build a formal, airtight case using everything Rose had given us, cross-referenced against the company's actual financial records, which, once someone competent finally looked, took less than 3 weeks to confirm every figure Rose's leaked ledger had suggested. 19 years. $6.2 million when the final number came in. Not the kind of theft that makes headlines overnight, but the kind that quietly hollows out a company from the inside, while its architect gets invited to every holiday dinner. My mother, Martha, when she was finally told, my father insisted on telling her himself, and I respected that, even though every instinct in me wanted to be in the room, reportedly sat in silence for almost 10 full minutes before saying, "He held my hand at my own mother's funeral. Not he stole from us. Not he lied to us. He held my hand at a funeral." Somehow that detail broke her faster than the money ever could have. Ethan was the hardest conversation. My brother had built his entire self-image around being the family's chosen success story, and the idea that the story had been engineered, that some of his own achievements had been genuinely earned. Sure, Harvard doesn't hand out scholarships based on falsified 6th-grade test scores. but that the framing of everything, the Ethan versus Raph narrative that had shaped every family dinner of our childhood, had been manufactured by a man neither of us ever suspected, that took him longer to accept than anyone. "I used to think you just didn't try," Ethan told me, the night we finally sat down together with the full file between us. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, 27 years old, and suddenly uncertain about a version of himself he'd never questioned. "I used to think, God, Raph, I used to think I was smarter than you, just naturally. I never once considered, neither did I said. That's the whole point. That's what he built. What do we do now? We take it all back, I said. Together, not the money. The story." The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday, ordinary as any other on the calendar. Nothing to suggest to Gene that this particular Thursday would be the last one he ever walked into that building as chairman. My father insisted on adding one line item to the agenda himself, worded carefully, boring enough that nobody would think twice. Review of personnel records oversight procedures. Gene, when he arrived, was exactly as warm and easy as he'd always been. He shook my hand. He asked about Odette. He made a joke about my truck needing new tires that I laughed at. Because I have gotten very good, over the past 2 months, at laughing at things that no longer felt funny. The room filled, 11 board members. My father at the head of the table. My mother sitting in on this one at my father's request, even though she rarely attended these meetings. Ethan beside her, and me, standing at the back near the door. The way I'd stood at the back of every family event for 35 years. Except this time it wasn't because nobody expected anything from me. It was because I wanted to watch Gene's face when the story changed. My father opened the meeting the way he always did, calm, measured. And then he said the words that ended it. "Before we move to quarterly earnings, I'd like to address the item I added to today's agenda. It concerns a personnel and financial review my office commissioned 6 weeks ago." Gene's smile didn't fade immediately. "That's the thing about people who've lied for 2 decades. The mask doesn't crack on the first blow. It cracks slow, in layers, like ice under weight it's never had to hold before." "Of course, Duncan," Gene said. "Happy to walk the board through anything." "I don't think that will be necessary," my father said. "The review is already complete." He nodded toward the door. The outside counsel he'd hired walked in with copies for every board member. The falsified records, the shadow ledger, the sworn statements from the former scholarship administrator, and the accountant who'd left the state, all of it bound and tabbed and impossible to argue with. I watched Gene's eyes move across the table as papers were distributed. Watched him do the math on how many people in that room now held physical proof of 2 decades of theft and manipulation, and I watched the exact second he understood there was no talking his way sideways out of this one. "Duncan," Gene said, and for the first time in my entire life, I heard real fear crack through his voice. "Let's discuss this privately, you and me, before." "There is no private version of this conversation anymore," my father said, and his voice was steadier than I'd heard it in weeks, steadier than I think I'd ever heard it. "You didn't just steal from this company, Gene. You stole from my son. 23 years, starting when he was 12 years old. You decided, on paper, in writing, that his life had a ceiling. And then you spent 2 decades making sure that ceiling became true whether he deserved it or not. Duncan, please, whatever you think you're seeing here, I'm seeing exactly what you built," my father said. "For once in my life, I'm not looking at what you told me to see. I'm looking at what's actually there." Gene's eyes finally found mine, at the back of the room, and for one long second, the two of us just looked at each other. The boy he'd spent decades convincing was small, and the man he now realized had never actually been small at all. Just quiet, just waiting, just patient in a way Gene had never once suspected, because patience was never a quality he'd bothered to look for in the person he'd already decided didn't matter. "You," Gene said, quiet now, almost disbelieving. "This came from you." "No," I said, and I let myself finally smile. The first real smile I'd given that man in 2 months. This came from the truth. I just finally let it in the room. I didn't ask Rose why she'd risked her career, and possibly worse, to hand a stranger an envelope at a graduation, not until months after the board meeting. Once Gene's case had already moved into the criminal courts, and there was nothing left for either of us to protect by staying careful. We met at the same diner where Odette and I had first read the letter, because Rose said she wanted to see the place that had apparently become, in her words, the birthplace of the end of Jean's career. And I think she meant it half as a joke, and half as something closer to closure for herself. I had a nephew, she told me, stirring sugar into coffee she didn't seem to want. Smart kid. Not William family smart, no fortune involved. Just a regular kid with a learning difference nobody diagnosed properly until he was 14. And by then he'd already been told by enough teachers and enough relatives that he was the slow one that he'd started believing it himself. I watched that boy shrink for years before anyone caught the mistake. By the time they did, some of the damage had already set. It doesn't fully undo that kind of damage. It just gets managed, if you're lucky. What happened to him? He's 31 now. Doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Runs his own small business. Has a wife who adores him. Kids who think he hung the moon. She smiled, small and tired. But I watched 14 years get stolen from that boy by people who never bothered to look past a label. And when I started seeing the same pattern show up in William Manufacturing's personnel files, a smart kid getting systematically written down on paper, year after year, in a way that didn't match anything I saw when I actually met him at company events, I couldn't sit on it. Not again. Not a second time in one lifetime. You'd met me, I said, before the graduation. Once. Years ago. Company picnic. You were maybe 22. Fixing a generator that had cut out during a storm, while half the executives stood around wondering who to call. You didn't wait for permission. You just fixed it. She shrugged. That's not the profile of a man Jean's paperwork described. I filed that away and didn't think much more of it until I started digging through records I wasn't supposed to have access to, trying to understand a pattern I'd noticed in the shadow ledger. Why the graduation? Why not just send it to a lawyer? Because lawyers file things in drawers and wait for permission, Rose said. I needed it in the hands of someone who'd actually read it the same day, and I needed you to see it happen in the room where the lie was being celebrated loudest. So you'd understand exactly what you were up against, and exactly how much they'd already gotten away with in plain sight. I'm sorry if that was cruel. I thought about it a long time. I decided cruelty in service of the truth was better than kindness, in service of another 20 years of the same lie. I told her it wasn't cruel. I told her it was the first honest thing anyone outside my own house had done for me in over 2 decades, and that I'd take an uncomfortable truth over a comfortable lie every single time, for the rest of my life, no exceptions. She left the diner before I did that day, same as she'd left the auditorium that first afternoon, quick and quiet, like a woman who'd finally set down something heavy enough to have been carrying it for years. I never fully repaid what she did for me. I'm not sure there's a version of repayment that would have covered it. What I did instead was make sure her name appeared nowhere in the criminal proceedings that could expose her to retaliation. Made sure William Manufacturing quietly compensated her for the risk she'd taken, and made sure, every single year on the anniversary of that graduation, I sent her a card that said nothing more than 3 words. You saw me. It felt like the only debt worth naming out loud. The board voted to remove Jean as chairman that same afternoon. Unanimous, 11-0. A vote that took less than 4 minutes for a betrayal that had taken over 2 decades to build. My father personally walked the criminal referral down to the district attorney's office himself 2 days later, refusing to let any assistant or lawyer do it for him, saying he needed to be the one to sign his name to it. Jean tried. In the weeks that followed, everything a cornered man tries. He called my mother first. She told me about it herself, sitting at her own kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from. He said, Martha, please, this is all some terrible misunderstanding that's spiraled out of control, she told me, her voice flat in a way I'd never heard from her before. And I said, Jean, you held my hand at my own mother's funeral. And he said, I know, that's exactly why you have to believe me. And I said, what did you say? I said, no, I don't, she told me. And I hung up. Mid-sentence. I don't think I've ever done that to another human being in my life. How do you feel? Lighter, she said, and she almost smiled. Isn't that strange? I thought it would feel like losing something. It feels like I finally put something down. He tried Ethan next. He called and started in on all of it, Ethan told me later, still visibly rattled. 30 years of birthday gifts. Remember when I taught you to drive? Remember the internship I got you at 19, like I was supposed to just add it all up and land on forgiveness? What'd you tell him? I told him gifts bought with stolen money aren't gifts. They're down payments on a lie, and I wasn't interested in collecting the rest of the bill. Ethan shook his head. He didn't have anything to say to that. First time in my life I've ever heard that man go quiet. He never called me. Why do you think that is? Odette asked me that night. The two of us lying in the dark, the same way we had the night this whole thing started. Because there's nothing left for him to say to me, I said. He built his entire scheme on the idea that I'd never notice, never push back, never be a threat. I was the load-bearing wall of the whole lie. Take that away, and there's no version of the conversation where he comes out ahead. So, he just disappears from your life. No apology, no confrontation. That's not disappearing, I said. That's exactly what happens when a foundation you never bothered to check finally gives out. It doesn't ask permission. It just goes. The financial fraud case moved through the courts over the following year, slower than any of us wanted, but thorough, methodical, unimpeachable, because my father had insisted from day one that this be done exactly right, with no shortcuts that a good lawyer could later exploit. Jean was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. The judge, reading through the 23 years of falsified personnel records as an aggravating factor in sentencing, called it a calculated, sustained campaign to manipulate a family for personal financial gain, and gave him the maximum the law allowed. I sat in that courtroom, in the front row this time, not the back, and I watched a man who'd once taught me to bait a hook get let out in handcuffs, and I felt exactly what I expected to feel. Nothing close to sympathy, not one flicker of it. Some people will tell you forgiveness is the healthy ending, the mature ending, the ending that lets you move on. I used to believe that too, back when I still believed the version of myself Jean had spent 23 years constructing. The slow one, the forgiving one, the one who wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back even if he did. I am done being that person. I don't forgive Jean. I don't think forgiveness was ever owed to a man who calculated, in writing, exactly how much of my childhood he was willing to sacrifice for $6.2 million spread across 2 decades. Some debts you don't forgive. You just make sure they're paid in full, and then you make sure the man who owes them never gets close enough to open a new tab again. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't have a name yet, at least not one I've ever heard spoken out loud. It's not grief for a person who died. It's grief for a childhood that existed on paper but never got to happen in real life. The childhood where a 12-year-old boy comes home with a 91st percentile test score and his father actually sees it, actually says something other than a distracted good job. Now go help your brother with his homework. I spent a lot of nights after the trial doing an accounting of my own, separate from the financial one the lawyers handled. Not dollars. Moments. There was the science fair in 7th grade, where I'd built a working water filtration model out of gravel, sand, and charcoal that I was genuinely proud of, and my father had shown up 40 minutes late. Taken one look at Ethan's poster board on solar energy, a poster board, mind you, against my working model, and spent the car ride home talking about how impressive it was that Ethan understood concepts at that level already. I brought that memory up with Ethan once, months after the trial. The two of us sitting on my back porch with 2 beers neither of us was really drinking. You remember the science fair? I asked him. 7th grade. I built a working filtration system. You had a poster board. Ethan winced. I remember Dad talking about my poster the whole ride home. I remember thinking, even then, that felt wrong. Your thing actually worked, Raph. Mine was construction paper and a diagram. You never said anything. I was 12, he said. What was I supposed to say? Actually, Dad, my brother's project is better. I didn't have the language for it yet. I just knew something felt off, and then I got good at not looking at it too closely, because looking at it too closely felt like it might cost me something I didn't want to lose. What would it have cost you? Being the favorite, Ethan said quietly. I'm not proud of that, but it's the truth, and you asked me to only give you the truth from now on, so there it is. I remember standing in the school gymnasium holding a second-place ribbon that I later learned had actually been a first-place finish before someone recalculated the judging criteria at the last minute. Jean had been a parent volunteer that year, helping organize the judging panel. I hadn't thought about that detail in over 20 years until Rose's files reminded me it existed. He was there for that too? Ethan asked when I told him. Jesus, Raph, he was everywhere. That was the whole design, I said. Be everywhere. Be trusted everywhere. Nobody questions the guy who's at every event with a camera and a checkbook. There was the summer I turned 15 and asked, quietly, at dinner, if I could take an advanced math course the following year. My father had looked at my mother, and my mother had looked at her plate, and my father had said, gently, in the voice adults use when they think they're being kind, let's not set you up to struggle, Raph. Ethan's the one who thrives under that kind of pressure. I didn't take the course. I spent the next 20 years assuming that decision had been correct, that I really wasn't built for that kind of pressure, and it took Rose's folder, a folder containing my actual 8th grade math assessment, the one showing I'd tested into the advanced track with room to spare, to understand that let's not set you up to struggle had never been about me at all. It had been a sentence handed to my father by a man who needed one William's son to stay unremarkable, so the other could shine bright enough that nobody asked questions about where the extra scholarship money, the extra mentorship funding, the extra family investment Jean kept steering toward Ethan's accounts, was actually coming from. Odette held me the night I did that particular piece of math out loud for the first time. Not the accounting firm math, the other kind. The kind where you count up every moment a door was quietly closed in front of you, and you finally understand somebody's hand was on the doorknob the whole time. You can't get those years back, she said, because Odette has never once lied to me, to make a moment feel softer than it actually is. But you get to decide what the next ones look like. And Raph, you get to decide that with a father who finally sees you, which is more than most people ever get. Even people who were never lied to in the first place. She was right, the way she's almost always right. But I want to be honest about something, because I promised myself at the start of all this that I wouldn't sand down the ugly parts to make the ending feel cleaner than it actually was. I was angry at my father for a long time after the truth came out. Not just at Jean. At my father too, quietly, in a place I didn't say out loud for months. Because belief is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one in the moment. And my father chose, for over 2 decades, to believe a story that made his own son smaller, without ever once demanding proof beyond a man's easy smile and a folder of paperwork he never thought to double-check. I told him that, eventually, sat him down on that same porch, and said it plainly. I need you to hear something, and I need you to not defend yourself while I say it. He nodded. He'd learned by then how to sit still through hard things instead of rushing to explain them away. You didn't just get lied to, I said. You let yourself get lied to. Because believing Jean was easier than sitting with a son who didn't fit the story you already had in your head about how your family was supposed to look. A brilliant one and an ordinary one. That story was comfortable. Easier than actually looking at both your sons and figuring out who we really were. My father was quiet for a long time, long enough that a bird landed on the porch railing, looked at both of us, and left again, unimpressed by whatever tension it had wandered into. You're right, he finally said. I don't have a version of that where I come out looking better, so I'm not going to try to build one. I let it be easy. I let a story about my son stay simple because simple was comfortable, and comfortable mattered more to me than it should have. I can't undo that. I can only stop doing it. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, the moment that passed between us on that porch. It was something quieter and more useful than forgiveness. It was 2 people agreeing to stop lying to each other, starting immediately, no matter how uncomfortable the truth turned out to be going forward. My father restructured the company's inheritance the following spring, sitting all 3 of us down, Ethan, me, Odette even. Because by then everyone understood Odette had been the steady hand holding the whole family upright, while the truth came apart and reassembled itself. I gave away everything at that graduation based on a story I never questioned, my father said. And I'm not going to make the same mistake twice, by overcorrecting out of guilt. So here's what's actually true, based on what I know now, instead of what I was told for 20 years. Ethan kept a meaningful stake in the company. Earned, verified, no falsified record propping it up. And once we all sat with that, Ethan told me privately he was relieved. That some part of him had always suspected the story didn't fully add up, that he was tired of carrying an inheritance built on somebody else's diminishment. I was given equal standing on the board, a role in operations that Rose herself helped me transition into given her years of institutional knowledge, and my father's public, unqualified apology, not whispered at a kitchen table, but stated plainly in front of the same employees who'd once watched him call me the family's disappointment at company picnics. The mansion, the cars, none of that mattered to me the way people probably assume it should. What mattered was smaller and larger at the same time. My father, on a random evening months later, sitting across from me at that same porch table, sliding an old 6th grade test score across to me, the real one, the 91st percentile, framed now. Something he'd had made without telling me. I should have asked more questions a long time ago, he said. I can't give you back 23 years. I can give you this instead. I see you now. All of you. Exactly as you actually are. Not as someone told me you were. I keep that frame in my office today, above my desk, where I can see it every single morning before I start work in the company that once told a 12-year-old boy his ceiling had already been reached. Odette asked me once, not long after everything settled, whether I ever thought about reaching out to Gene, wherever he ended up after his sentence, just to say something. Anything, some kind of closure. I told her no. I told her closure isn't a conversation you have with the person who hurt you. Closure is a life you build so completely, so deliberately, so far beyond anything they ever thought you capable of, that their opinion of you simply stops being relevant to the story at all. I didn't know it, sitting in the back row at my brother's graduation, clapping for an inheritance I'd been told my whole life I didn't deserve. I didn't know that the woman walking toward me with an envelope wasn't handing me a scandal. She was handing me my own life back, and I was never giving it away again. 2 years later, almost to the day, I sat in a different auditorium, in a different city, watching a different graduation. Manny's granddaughter, actually. A small engineering program he'd insisted the whole family attend, because that girl's smarter than half the executives I ever worked under, and somebody ought to clap loud enough for her to hear it. I clapped loud. Front row this time, not the back, though by then the seat I chose had stopped meaning what it used to mean. Odette sat beside me, her hand resting easy in mine, no envelope hidden in either of our pockets, nothing left to brace for. You're doing the jaw thing, she whispered, nudging me. Am not. You are. Different reason this time, though, yeah, I admitted. Good reason. My father sat on my other side, checking the program twice like he wanted to make sure he had the right row this time. You nervous? I asked him, half joking. A little, he admitted. I keep thinking about how many of these I sat through and only really watched one of my sons. I don't want to make that mistake again, even at somebody else's graduation. You're allowed to just enjoy it, Dad, I know, he said. I'm working on that. Enjoying things without keeping score. Ethan flew in from the coast, where he now ran a division of the company built on what he'd actually earned once the falsified story stopped propping him up, and leaned over from the row behind us before the ceremony started. You nervous for her? He asked, nodding toward the stage. A little, I said. Manny talks about this kid like she hung the moon. Feels like a lot to live up to. She'll be fine, Ethan said. Some people just get seen early. Lucky ones. Yeah, I said, and something passed between us in that word. Not sadness exactly, just a shared understanding of what it costs when nobody does. Lucky ones. My mother sat 2 rows back with a folder of her own tucked into her purse, old photographs she'd started collecting from those early years. The ones she said she wanted to look at now with fresh eyes, now that she knew which parts of the story attached to them had been true, and which parts had been engineered by a man who'd held her hand at her own mother's funeral, while quietly bleeding her family's company, dry 3 floors above the wake. Show him the one from the science fair, she told me, leaning forward to pass me a photo before the lights dimmed, the one nobody looked at properly the first time. It was me, 12 years old, standing next to my filtration model, grinning like I'd just built something that mattered. Nobody in the original photo was looking at the camera except me. "I'm keeping this," I told her. "I hoped you would," she said. Rose came too, sitting quietly near the back by choice, the same way she always chose the back, though these days it felt less like hiding and more like habit, the comfortable kind. The kind you keep even after the reason for it disappears. I caught her eye before the lights went down and mouthed the same 3 words I sent her every year. She mouthed something back. Just 2 words this time. "You're welcome." I thought about Jean exactly once that day, briefly, somewhere between the dean's opening remarks and the first name being called. I thought about the version of my life he'd tried to author. 12 years old, ceiling reached, story finished before it had properly begun. And I thought about how completely, how thoroughly, how permanently that version of the story had been thrown out and rewritten in my own handwriting instead. I don't forgive him. I want to say that plainly, one more time, because I know how these stories are supposed to end, with some tidy scene of magnanimous mercy that makes the protagonist look bigger for having granted it. I'm not interested in looking bigger. I'm interested in being accurate. What Jean did wasn't a mistake owed grace. It was a calculated theft of 2 decades from a boy who never got a vote in the matter. And some things simply don't earn a second chapter once the truth catches up to them. He's still where the court put him. I've made sure, every year since, that he stays exactly there, with no quiet family intervention. No softened parole letter. Nothing. Some doors, once they close, deserve to stay that way. What I am interested in is this: a front row seat, finally, at a life that was always mine, to begin with. A father who sees me now instead of a story someone handed him. A wife who never once needed proof of who I really was, because she'd known it from the very first day. Envelope or no envelope, a brother who calls just to talk, no agenda, no old hierarchy hanging over either of us. A woman named Rose, who taught me that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is hand a stranger the truth and walk away, before they can be thanked for it. Manny's granddaughter's name got called. The whole row of us stood up at once, clapping loud enough that she found us in the crowd and laughed. Delighted, the way you're supposed to laugh at your own graduation, the way I never quite got to at mine. I clapped until my hands hurt. Some ovations you save up for 23 years without even knowing it.